Hello everybody, this is Christa and welcome back to Adventures in Metaphysics. Now today I am really excited to be sitting down to film a video response to the new hashtag put out by Dani Mystic called #MyClassics. Now Dani put this out last Friday and it popped up as a notification while I was at work, and to tell you, it was just the most exciting thing to see. Oh I had no idea exactly what she meant by my classics, but I knew it was gonna be good, and I knew I was gonna get to see some of her decks that I love seeing. I love her style. So I'm gonna try and explain this in the best way I can, but I will, of course, link Dani's original video down below where she sort of lays down the idea behind the hashtag #MyClassics. So the idea of your classics isn't necessarily pulling out your most historical decks or your version of, say, like the Rider-Waite-Smith. It's the decks you have that are kind of like almost your ride or dies, or when someone thinks about you and your practice, what are the decks that they instantly associate with you? And it was really funny because I instantly sent a screenshot of the video to Rachel, and I could list off easily like what her classic decks were. And she was able to kind of give me a list back, which was really, really exciting and helpful. And it's funny how that works, where you use something so much that it kind of gets associated with you. Anyway, I hope that made somewhat of sense, but it made sense in my head. But regardless, I do recommend, of course, checking out the original video where you'll probably get a better idea of what my classics are. So today I'm going to show you the classic Christa decks. So let's just get started. So the first one I feel like I have to show is an obvious one. I feel like I've talked about it in like every video at this point. And that is my Cat Tarot, my first tarot deck ever. This is just one that, when I think about myself in tarot, this always pops in my head because I just think it's the funniest story about how I even started that. It wasn't even necessarily an interest in tarot, it's just that the cover looked like my own cat. And just like how it's sort of like blown up in my life and become this super important thing. I think it's funny how things can kind of start that way. But I love this deck, and I don't honestly use it too much for readings for myself. I use this one to do readings for cats. I don't know if that sounds just totally crazy, but there's some times where I feel like, I don't know, Stevie's my cat. Maybe she seems a little bit off, or I just want to check in with her. And this is the deck I'll pull from. And it's just got such a cute and spunky attitude, and it makes me think of her because that's exactly how she is. So this is definitely my classic deck because it's one that I'm always gonna have with me, and it just has one of my favorite stories attached to it, I guess you could say. But that's enough talking about that, because I mean, honestly, I feel like all of these decks I'm gonna show I've probably shown about 1,000,001 times, but I'm so excited to be able to go through afterwards and watch everyone else's my classics, because I love watching any sort of favorites, or like favorites of all time especially, which I feel like that's kind of what this is. So the next one I have to show is, let's go for an oracle deck. This is my Coastal Curiosities oracle deck. And this was one that, as soon as I got it in, I backed it on Kickstarter. As soon as it came in, it's almost never left my little reading table I have, or it's a reading desk, because I find it pairs so well with so many decks, and something about the images and the keywords it really connects for me. It's one of the first oracle decks I've gotten where I don't find I need to rely on the guidebook and didn't need to rely on it right away. You know, of course I have some oracle decks that I've just had for so long and used so much that I don't need the guidebook anymore. but this is one that I felt like I never really needed to use it. And it's interesting because the creator, Lennox Reese, posted on her Instagram once asking how everyone felt about guidebooks. And she shared that the purpose, or how she kind of meant this deck to be used, was to pull a card and think of your own intuitive response and sort of what it brought up, and then if you chose to, read the meaning in the guidebook. And doing that, just it's one of my favorite things. But it is one of those decks that I feel like it's either going to work for you or it's not, because I think it's this collage style. I feel like I could see some people pulling it out, and if they don't just get the meanings of the pictures in the cards, it could be tricky. And I find that I don't really tend to focus on any particular piece of the picture. And I think that's why it really works so well for me. I kind of see it as a whole. I don't really look at the different details. Although now that I say that, I'm very interested too, and to sort of dig into what these different symbols mean. But that is certainly a classic deck for me, and it's one that I always keep around, and it goes with everything. I'm realizing that I surprisingly have more Oracle than Tarot here, and that's interesting, because I'm always one to say that I don't have many Oracle decks that work for me. I guess the ones I do have really do, so I can't complain. But my next one is the Prairie Majesty Oracle, and I am just such a fan of anything that Kara Simons does. I have her first Oracle deck she put out, the Grandmother's Oracle, and there is another edition coming out, the Grandmother's Song, that I'm very excited about. But this is really, if I'm looking for an animal-based oracle, or even just nature-based, this is the one I'm going to go for. This is my favorite one to pull if I am just looking for a guiding question, because we get those right up here. But it's one that it pairs with so many of my decks. I am a really big animal deck person, so this one, it just goes with everything, and the writing is beautiful. And it's another one, I think, because the prompt is put in a question, that I don't often need the guidebook. I love looking at it because Kara's writing is amazing, but the focus isn't really on the animal. And I think that's why it works so well for me, because with a lot of animal oracles where it just says the animal name, that really doesn't do much for me, because I'm not super familiar with many animals. But this doesn't put the focus at all. We get the name like within the picture, but then we get a keyword and a question. So this is one that, again, it was one of my very first Oracle decks, actually, now that I think of it. So I've had this one for a really long time. It's one I feel like I could pull out for any question. So this is definitely a classic deck for me. So let's do another Oracle and save the tarots for the end. So my next classic deck is my Memento Mori, which I'm so tempted. I've made 2 other bags specifically for other people's Memento Mori copies, and I made a tie with these skull beads on it. And the itch I have to like rip this one out and put skull beads on mine too, it's strong. It's strong. We haven't done it yet though. Anyhow, this is definitely a classic deck for me as well, because again, I just feel like it's one I can use for any kind of reading. And it's the only oracle I feel like I have that I am willing to pull it like I would tarot cards. I don't usually do a whole reading with oracle cards. They are solely, well, I don't want to say solely, but mostly I use them to clarify or be a starting off point for my tarot pull. But this one, I don't use it actually at all in that way. This one I will pull, just like I pull my tarot cards. And I just feel like it's a classic because it's one that keeps building in size with just the different expansion packs I am acquiring, which the creator just put out a pre-order for her final expansion pack. I'm so excited. I can imagine how big it's gonna make the deck. It's already so large. I had to split it in half just to hold it up for this video, but it's one I feel like I can pull out for any kind of question. I can use it on its own, so it's just a really, really versatile deck. And just one, again, that I always keep around. I can't imagine life without it kind of thing. So this is the Memento Mori Oracle. Now, my next deck, I guess you could say, it's gonna be multiple decks, but this one made me laugh because when I asked Rachel what her thoughts were on like what classic Christa decks are, she listed off a lot of the ones I've shown already, and the last thing she put was, and any Holly Audley deck. Which, oh my gosh, it just made me laugh because I was like, I know, I didn't realize I was this much of a Holly Audley fangirl, but I guess I am because I've somehow collected most of her decks. I don't have one of the other graveyard themed one, or cemetery, sorry, but Rachel has that one, and so that's one we actually keep in our office, so I kind of feel like I have it because I get to use it whenever I want to. So I'm just gonna show my little Holly Audley collection here. And that is the Bonaventure Cemetery Divination deck is the first one, and this is a little oracle deck where we get the name of the item, and it comes with a guidebook that gives you a little message based off of it. But this deck is just it's so cute. First of all of her decks are so just cute and little, which I love. I love tiny decks. But I just really love I know I said this in my last video, but it's how do my decks end up so flipped around? Oh my gosh, I feel like every other card is like reversed in the way it's facing. We're gonna roll with it. We're gonna roll with it. Anyways, I love the colors this deck uses, and it's one that, even though it doesn't really have keywords and able to use it intuitively, the pictures allow you to do that in a way. And it's just one that I love using as a clarifier for my other decks, my tarot decks. It's really useful in that way in a reading because it's not overbearing in the spread because the cards are small, they are monochromatic, and they don't have these blaring sort of messages or keywords. They're more subtle than that. And so I just think it works so beautifully in that way. And now my other two were the pair that came in her last Kickstarter campaign, and that is the Teeny Tiny Tarot and the Mini Divi. And these are so, so awesome. I love having smaller decks to be able to put them in my bag, or if I'm traveling anywhere, I always bring these two with me because, of course, they pair well together. They're not necessarily meant to solely work together. It's just, you know, her art style is so cohesive across her decks, and it's just really, really, really great in that way. So they work well together. But I also find that they are really easy to pair with other decks as well. And again, I think it's because of their size, the more limited color palette, the limited artwork, I guess you could say. It's a little bit more minimalistic, but also not at the same time. I'm such a fan of her artwork. It's something about, I think, the colors that she uses, and definitely her subject matters. I love anything that's gonna have to do with cemeteries and ghosts and skulls, and she puts all of that in here in such a nice way. I love this mini Divi. This one, it gives you the name of the ghost card and the sentence right on the card. So this one is super easy again to travel with, to kind of just bring with you, because you don't need a book. We've got our message right at the bottom here. I'm super excited to see the other mini Divis when they come out. They're going to be a series, which is so exciting. So this was the first one in what's going to be a series of 5, I believe. And I think this is correct information, but I'll have to go back and check. But I believe the backs are all going to be the same. So that way, if you chose, you could combine as many as you want, or even get all 5 and combine them to make this like super deck, which I feel like customizable decks is the most exciting thing to me. And I feel like so many decks are doing that nowadays. Like I just got the Tarot of Mystical Moments, and being able to go through and pick which king cards you wanted. It gave you a more feminine and masculine version of each king, and being able to go and like pick and choose, I feel like it's so exciting. I don't know why, it just really adds something. But those are all of my Holly Oddly decks, and those are certainly Christa classics, because I feel like I'm just gonna end up collecting them all, but not even in like a gotta catch them all kind of way. I genuinely love using her decks. They're simple and just so great. I feel like I don't have enough good things to say. They're simple yet so full of character at the same time. Anyways, I will stop gushing about that and move on to my last classic deck. And that is my first edition Northern Animal Tarot. This, I think, might have been my first indie deck. And I got a, the only reason I was able to get it was the creator had some factory seconds left over from, I don't know if it was a Kickstarter or a pre-order. I'm not super sure. I really wasn't paying attention to the realm of indie decks at that point. But I just fell in love with it as soon as I got it. This one really instantly clicked for me in a way that the other decks I had so far just didn't. I feel like this one just gets me. I don't know if that makes any sense or if anyone else feels that way about some of their decks, but I hadn't really understood what people meant by becoming bonded with their decks beforehand until I got this one. And this is one I just feel so connected and bonded with. I feel like I always go to it with any sort of like personal problems or questions, or even if I just want a little pick-me-up. Like I feel like I could just use it for anything, and it's always gonna know the right thing to say for me. And I just love it. I love the animals and the extra cards. The extra cards are amazing. I don't think I have once pulled from this deck and not gotten one of the extra cards, which we get seasons, we get shadow cards, and moon phases. And I get at least one of those extra cards every single time, to the point where I feel like there's some of the regular tarot cards I might have never pulled for myself because I always get those extra cards. So there's just a huge connect for me there. And specifically my first edition, I do have the second edition as well, which I love. And I love all the color changes, and it's not one that I imagine rehoming ever either, or like moving out of my collection, but I just have such a bond with this first edition that I don't know that it could ever take its place. So my last classic Christa deck is this Northern Animal Tarot, and I am just so attached. I just love this deck so much, so much. If you can get your hands on the third edition, which I do believe is either going on Kickstarter or something of the sort soon, you totally should. This deck is so good, and the second edition is beautiful. So that is all for my classic Christa decks, but I did also want to share, because I was looking at my collection to sort of pick out these classic decks, and I noticed that a lot of my decks are newer to me. I've really gone through this phase of moving out decks that weren't really working for me anymore, or just didn't connect with what I was trying to do, and bringing in ones to sort of replace them, I guess you could say, in a way. And I wanted to share the decks that I have that I think are going to become Christa classics. Because I have a bunch right now that I feel like have come in the last few months that I already feel so connected to, and it's just, I feel like I'm in a really good place right now where I've got so many decks that just really, really clicked and really feel right. So I wanted to share some of those. I don't know if that's a little bit of a cheat, but we're rolling with it. We're rolling with it. So my first one is definitely my Mons Tarot. I have the full-size second edition and the travel size that's at work. And I bring this deck out for any kind of question I have. It's one that always calls me out, which is surprising because it's got such cute, I guess I should take out the deck so you can see, but I'm sure most of you have seen this deck about a million times, but it's got such cute monsters that I never would have expected it to read the way it did for me. I really thought this was going to be an inner child deck and one that I pulled out for those purposes, or if I wanted to just kind of play, but that's not at all what it is. It's one that I go to if I need some serious advice or I'm really confused and about whatever it is and I need a straight answer and something that's going to be blunt with me and call me out a little bit. And that is totally this deck for me, which I never would have expected. So it's just one that I already feel so bonded to and so attached to. I mean, enough to get 2 versions of a deck, and I had never done that before, aside if you want to count my 2 editions of the Northern Animal Tarot, but I never gotten 2 of the same deck. But I got this one so that I could have it constantly at home and at work. I don't know if that's a little bit crazy, but I'm happy with it. So my next deck that I think is going to turn into a Christa classic is one that I can't believe I hadn't tried. The Everyday Witch, which first of all, I have to show. Look at the little witch hat tassels. I'm so excited about those. I made a bag for this deck like the night I got it in. So I don't know what rock I was living under that I never got this deck. Rachel's probably rolling her eyes at this point because she has loved this tarot deck for the longest time and always shows it to me. And I don't know why I always was just hesitant about it. I was convinced I just wasn't gonna want a deck that showed more realistic people or just even people at all. I don't usually tend to gravitate towards that. And certainly I thought I was gonna be thrown off by the mix of sort of modern and medieval imagery that happens in this deck, but I really, really enjoy it. It's one that is just such a clear reader for me so far. I just feel like, again, I can ask it any sort of question. It's just really universal, and I find that when I pull out this deck to read for other people, it's been one that they really enjoy too. Even if they've not really known anything about tarot, I feel like a lot of people tend to be drawn to this deck. It's just something about the pictures that seems inviting, yet, again, gives really, really clear messages. I really don't have any trouble reading with this deck, like right out of the box. So this, oh my gosh. That's why all my cards are flipped around. I'm dropping them all over the place. So this, I am 99% sure is gonna be another Christa classic. Okay, so my last thing I'll share, and then I'll stop my jabbering, is I really think my Pagan Otherworld Tarot is going to become a classic for me. I love pulling this one out. It feels really connected to spirit to me, if that makes sense. Like, I just feel like I have this like direct line of communication when I use this deck. I think it's the simple colors, the airiness of it gives me that feeling. So when I have, you know, any of those bigger questions or things of that sort, this has been the one I am always pulling out because I don't really feel like Otherwise, I have a deck that feels that way to me. Probably because I've not really sought it out until recently. So this is always the one that I'm drawn to. And I feel like this is just a classic for most people who have it. It's such a beautiful deck. It's such a clear reader. Even though it's a pip deck, it's still got this beautiful imagery behind it that you don't have to really guess at the meanings. It's got these cool moon cards, which I love. It's just something that's really special. So I really think this is going to become a Christa classic as well. But anyhow, that was the end of what I had to share. Those are all my current Christa classics and hopefully Christa classics to be. But I hope you all had so much fun watching that. I felt like a little kid again, getting to pull out all my decks and get to look at all my favorites again and get to share them all with you. So anyway, I hope you had fun watching my hashtag classic decks, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.